Series 3 of Red Dwarf was something of a soft reboot. The budget was increased a bit, making some things more possible. Mel Bibby was brought on as production designer and given free rein to redesign most things from the ground up. They wanted him in Series 1, but he wasn't available. The in-universe explanation is that they moved to the officers' quarters that were previously still irradiated and found or made a bunch of new clothes. A bunch of new clothes provided by new costume designer Howard Burden, who still does the job today. Anyway, that explains Lister and the Cat's new looks, but what about Rimmer? Well, I maintain that Rimmer wouldn't just invent his own uniform. He wants to rule the current power structure, not invent a new one. Since he has changed his look, I'm guessing they found a derelict that was launched years after Red Dwarf that had a special hologram uniform on file and he liked the look of it. This is kinda backed up later on when we get to Holoship. They lost one cast member when Norman Lovett decided not to return as Holly. He lived in Edinburgh and got sick of travelling to London for rehearsals and then to Manchester for recording. But they gained two new ones when Harry Hayridge, who played Hilly, the female Holly in Parallel Universe, started playing Holly. Although Holly had a smaller role from here out. I'm really glad the net didn't exist when this happened, because ye olde Reddit would have been full of complaints about misandry and white genocide, even though that literally happened in episode 1. A reminder, Grant and Naylor have never really given a crap about the sex of the actors they cast. Holly was originally written as female, but the cast love it. And now they cast Hayridge. It is interesting that the show in the late 80s managed to have a character transition and no one cared. At all. I can't think of any other show that's managed that. Yeah, Holly's a computer, but she's sentient and the TV show called it a sex change. So it counts. The other new cast member is Robert Llewellyn, from Ashen's and the Quest for the Game Child as Crichton. Something else that would have set ye olde R Red Dwarf aflame. What, they replaced the proper English butler Crichton with him? And they made him Canadian? Well, fake Canadian. Well, at least they didn't make him a woman. Wait, they did what to Holly? Well, at least they never did that to the Ghostbusters! Although Crichton's fake Canadian, they kind of didn't work that out right away. In some bits shot at the start of the series, he has a weird, indefinable accent. A bit like mine.
We rendezvoused with Holly, and then when you didn't show up after 2 days, I said we should go and look for you.
David Ross, the original Crichton, didn't return because he was busy on stage. One of the producers saw Robert Llewellyn playing a robot in the play Mammon, Robot Born of Woman, and the rest is history. Like I said in an earlier video, it's easier to think of Red Dwarf as taking place over several similar but not exact parallel universes. Because of the complete overhaul of the look of the show, this is one of the points where you can, if you want, see it as an alternate reality. The overhaul happened partly because the budget increased, but mainly because Grant and Naylor hated the military grey look the previous series has had. To go along with the new look, they even got a completely rejigged intro, and one of the best theme songs ever written. I can't play it because of the bots, but look it up, it's amazing. The last change is the introduction of Starbug. It's like a green-blue midget, but far bigger and better. Series 3 aired from the 14th of November until the 19th of December 1989, and starts with a Star Wars-ish crawl explaining what happened since the end of Series 2. They were originally going to start this series with Lister giving birth, but decided that it wasn't working, so they scrapped the episode and summed it up in a crawl. Lister's given birth and sent the kids to the parallel universe to be raised by their dad. Holly fell so in love with Hilly that he decided to change his appearance and become her. Rimmer stole a hat from Lieutenant Green from Cat and Scarlet. Cat is... Cat. And Lister found Crichton, well, pieces of him. He crashed the space bike just off screen. Lister rebuilt him, and now he's a bit different. Episode 1 is backwards, probably the only sitcom episode to be directly inspired by the writings of Stephen Hawking. But before we get to the physics weirdness, we start with Cat and Lister wanting to screw Wilma Flintstone.
Well, I would go with Betty. But I'd be thinking of Wilma.
Does that even count as bestiality? Crichton is learning to pilot Starbug under Rimmer's tutelage. It's a symphony of the incompetent leading the blind. Still, they manage to fly into a time hole and get spat out on early 90s Earth. But there's a catch. Reality goes in reverse. This is what happens when some comedy writers read a brief history of time and get funny ideas. This was apparently a technical nightmare to plan out, rehearse, and film. Sometimes it's simple, just film stuff and play it in reverse, but other times they need some people going forwards and others going backwards in the same shot. I did some of that in a review myself, and I needed to invent whole new words to try and explain what was going on to the others involved in the filming. and our bit was really simple.
Yes, mistress! Minion, come here!
I can't imagine how much worse it must have been dealing with a lot of people at all levels of a full production.
Well, the rest series with us.
Flobbedob blib blob bleeb.
Rimmer and Crichton take jobs to tide them over until Lister and the cat A. realise they're missing, B. care, and C. find them. So take the obvious route and become performance artists.
We are the sensational reverse fellas and gentlemen. We shall see you last night.
But before that, we get the scene where Lister found Crichton and Rimmer's Starbug. They had to get Lister to dry off as he left the lake, so they filmed him walking in reverse, with weights in his costume so he didn't float to the top and ruin the shot. He nearly drowned. They steal a bike and eventually make it to London, where Rimmer and Crichton are performing alongside reverse Tony Hawk's. The performance involves amazing tricks like eating and drinking forwards.
This is entertainment to these people. It's pathetic. The Bulgarian, they have very simple tastes.
It takes an embarrassingly long time, but Lister eventually puts it together. Rimmer and Crichton don't want to leave, though. There's no death in this world. They're famous and successful. So what could convince them to leave? Well, this outburst that I've reversed because I'm a prat with a sad life.
Pointing at you, I'm pointing at you. But I'm not actually addressing you. I'm addressing the one prat in the country who's bothered to get hold of this recording, turn it round and actually work out the rubbish that I'm saying. What a poor, sad life he's got!
And the bar fight that follows it. Ever since the landing on the planet, Lister's been complaining about a cracked rib, hurt back and black eye. The fight fixes them all, while also epically tidying the pub. Rimmer and Crichton are still fired and the episode's just about done, so they all head back to Starbug. This is a classic of high-concept madness merged with comedy. It's occasionally mind-melting. The amount of planning needed to pull it off is inspiring. Rimmer and Crichton's defense this reality is better than their own is weird, but well thought out, and the fact that they manage it all in less than 30 minutes is just astounding. As for the guest cast, it's always nice to see Tony Hawk, and the ranting guy was Arthur Smith, who can sometimes be seen in QI and other random British comedy things. Next up is Marooned. It was the first episode filmed, and the reason Starbug is Starbug. Originally they were going to bring in a larger white version of Blue Midget called the White Midget, but the design got a bit bug-like and then the visual effects designer thought this episode's planet should have snow. A white ship on a snow planet would be a bit shit, so they made it green and called it Starbug. We open with Holly evacuating the Red Dwarf for 12 hours because the ship is approaching multiple black holes. Holly is going to navigate the ship and meet up with the crew at a moon on the other side. Lister and Rimmer on Starbug while Cat and Crichton are on Blue Midget.
A Blue Midget is loaded.
Again, this was the first episode filmed. They hadn't settled on an accent for Crichton when they filmed that line. All goes well for a time as we get some character bits with Rimmer and Lister. Very Series 1.
He told me that in a previous incarnation, I was Alexander the Great's chief eunuch.
Do you know something? I believe you.
Eventually the scene's interrupted by a very rude fireball and they crash in an ice world. Will they survive until rescue? Well, obviously, but not before Lister gets so desperate that Craig Charles had to eat dog food on camera.
Well, now I can see why dogs lick their testicles.
Right after the crash, we cut to 3 days later. Supplies are just about non-existent, power's at a minimum, so the heating's not running, and Lister is getting desperate.
Lolita. Is it okay for being Lolita?
Save page 61.
In order to save Lister's life, they have to burn some treasured possessions. It's all very dramatic. Don't worry, it gets undercut beautifully, because deep down, everyone in this is an asshole. This whole thing is a nice change of pace for the show. For something set so long after the probable extinction of the human race, Red Dwarf doesn't tend to do much in the way of desperation, and it's a subject that can be richly mined for comedy. This is a two-person play, and unlike the last episode, this is entirely studio-bound. So the director, Ed Bye, decided to film the whole thing handheld, which is frankly really odd for a 1989 sitcom. It was about a generation before its time, but it really gave the whole thing some energy that regular studio cameras wouldn't be able to capture. This is a great character piece and it added more dimensions to Lister and Rimmer's relationship. I have no complaints. And there were no guest stars, so I'll shut up and get on to the next episode. Polymorph. The episode's a direct parody of Alien and by extension a parody of things like It, The Creature from Space, and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Probably. I don't know, I've never seen it. It introduces the Gelfs, genetically engineered life forms, otherwise known as one of Red Dwarf's two alien stand-ins. The Gelf in question is a living weapon, created by future humans and locked inside a deep space prison ship. It somehow survived for millions of years, it even more somehow escaped its prison, and somehow it's got aboard the Red Dwarf. Explanations are for the weak. It has two main powers, to instantly change shape into anything and to suck the emotions from its victims, emotionally crippling them. I think the idea was that it would be dropped behind enemy lines to turn an enemy army into a bunch of cowards. We start with Lister using materials from the medical bay for cooking. Mainly because he's Lister. Cat's unimpressed though.
I'm supposed to cut my food with a scalpel? Something that's been inside someone's guts?
It's followed up by one of the show's classic images. The polymorph turns into Lister's boxer shorts just before he wears them, and Crichton has to save him.
Well, I can't say I'm totally shocked.
The polymorph turns into a giant special effect before sucking out Lister's sense of fear, which honestly doesn't strike me as the best strategy from the polymorph.
Well, I say let's get out there and twat it.
They detect it in the cargo bay and use some bazookoids, a new creation for this series, to try and kill it. Bazookoids are basically badass looking mining equipment that can also be used like guns. They can also be set to heat seeking, but that's not much good when the warmest thing in the room is the cat. The polymorph turns into a beautiful woman and steals Cat's vanity before quickly stealing Crichton's guilt and turning into Rimmer's mum so it can steal his anger.
Oh, look! It's Bonehead's mum.
You've just made love to my mother.
Yeah, do you want to make something of it?
I really don't know how it grabs Rimmer's emotions, he's meant to be intangible. Anyway, seeing how each of the crew is affected is a thing of beauty. It says something when Kill Crazy Lister is the least funny of the new versions, and he suggested headbutting it to death with a nuclear warhead.
What do we go down to the ammunition stores, get the nuclear warheads, and then strap one to my head?
Well, I think we should send Lister in as a decoy. And while it's busy eating him alive, we can creep up on it unawares.
Good plan.
Now, if that's not enough, I'm sorry, it's time for the t-shirts. Chameleonic life forms? No thanks.
I think everybody's right, except me. So just forget that.
They all head down to the cargo bay for the final battle. It's an epic battle that uses about 4 different angles in the same small pile of boxes, and involves the opening of the door and the heat-seeking rounds from earlier. Mission accomplished, and they got their emotions back. There was a second polymorph on board, but only fanfiction knows what happened with that. This is another classic. Seeing everyone act against type was wonderful. Especially Rimmer, as Rolf Harris' persona was come up with mainly by Chris Barry and was heavily ad-libbed.
One drawback with that, the abbreviation is clitoris.
This is where the new form of Red Dwarf really crystallizes, largely gone as a self-contained character stuff and continuity comedy. It's been replaced with parodies, action, and mad ideas. Personally, I feel it's an improvement. Next is Body Swap, another episode that ejects the very concept of guest stars. A Scudder has gone mad and rewired the ship. They're repairing it, but they haven't been able to find the self-destruct yet, so no one's to touch anything.
Auto-destruct sequence initiated. The ship will detonate at 50.
That's a very dumb thing you just did there.
The only way to cancel the destruct is to get a high-ranking officer to do it, because Holly forgot to update the protocol. To get round this, Crichton downloads the executive officer's mind from her holodisk and into Lister's body. Not sure why, when you could just replace Rimmer and... Oh, I can see why they didn't even suggest that. They didn't want to spend their last few minutes listening to abject whining.
Wait a minute, I never used to be a man.
It doesn't matter though, because when the countdown finishes, the snacks Lister order gets spat out. It was wired to the warning, but not the destruct itself. This all gives Rimmer an idea, borrowing Lister's body and being a prat about it.
I want me body back now.
Look, okay, I went a bit bananas the first few days.
To film the episode, they had to perform the lines live, but without speaking, instead of just saying them and deleting the audio, so they didn't lose the ambient sounds along with the voice. The lines were then dubbed over in post. I did the same thing in my Naked Killer review. And to celebrate the hilarity of the dub...
Wow, this is gonna be great!
Because of all this, they couldn't film the episode live with the usual studio audience. Overall, the dubbing doesn't quite work. The timing's right, but it sounds a bit off. Craig Charles's voice sounds defeated and depressed in the dubbing, but that's sort of accidentally appropriate. Well, Chris Barry is brilliant, though that's because of his extensive experience as a voice actor. Anyway, Rimmer runs off with Lister's body, so Cat and Lister need to follow, leading to a bit of a continuity issue.
Well, I was going to pilot White Midget. I'll do it.
White Midget, the ship that evolved into Starbug. So Rimmer approaches this reused footage from Marooned and threatens to kill Lister before crashing, getting returned, and finally stealing Cat's body. Roll credits! This is the weakest so far this series. It's almost as technically impressive as Backwards, but nowhere near as funny. It doesn't have the heart of Marooned or the imagination of Polymorph. It's an okay episode, but looks worse next to so many great ones. To make things worse, it's a one-joke episode. Rimmer has access to a body and so he eats stuff. He's treated like a cartoon. Next is Time Slides, essentially a bit of a remake of Stasis Leak, where the crew use a bizarre and impossible form of time travel to try and manipulate the present. Something weird's happening in the photo lab and the pics are coming to life, Harry Potter style. So far, so silly. Then they act as time portals.
Yo, I'm in the photograph.
Excuse me, can you stand aside, please? We're trying to take a photograph.
I'm actually in the photograph.
I gotta say, the effect of Lister entering is a brilliant mix of clever positioning, timing, and superimposing. Fantastic stuff. And naturally, you can't leave the edge of the photo. Oh, this is for Omega. That guy is Mark Steele. He doesn't get a line, but it's him. It even works on really old photographs. Lister has a fight with Hitler, steals his briefcase, and accidentally ruins a plot to assassinate him. The possibilities are endless, especially when porn's involved. But Crichton is the best suggestion.
We could go to Dallas in November 1963, stand on the grassy knoll and shout,
"Nice shot, Mr. President!" That'll make sense in about 4 series' time. Anyway, Lister decides to go back in time and give teenage him a tension sheet so he can invent it and become a millionaire. Tension sheets are bubble wrap painted red that you pop when you're tense. They're very big in the future. Unfortunately, Lister's playing with his teenage band, Smegheads, who are made up of, and I'm not kidding, Craig Charles' little brother Emil as Lister, and half of Napalm Death, who Craig Charles had recently hung out with while making a kids show called What's That Noise?
Ladies and gentlemen, Napalm Death.
If more kids shows made space for grindcore, the world would be a better place. Anyway, young him's a dick, but eventually takes the sheet and the future's changed. Lister never joined the Red Dwarf crew, so Cat doesn't exist and Crichton was never rescued. I have no idea why Rimmer still exists, though. They track alternate Lister down via a TV show dedicated to wealthy shitheads. The presenter is Ruby Wax, wife of the director Ed Bye. Her part was originally supposed to be Graham Chapman, but he died before filming. Rimmer heads in to try and bring Lister back. It doesn't work, because of course it doesn't. This Lister has no idea who he is. That plan's a bust, so he tries again, head into his own past and give himself the tension sheet. Now, I want to know why there's a photograph of this group of 8-year-olds sleeping at this boarding school. But the plan doesn't quite work out because his roommate overhears the conversation and invents a tension sheet instead, but Rimmer ends up alive in the future. Which is hilarious.
I am alive!
What was he saying?
It took me a while to work out why Rimmer would be alive again, but then I remembered Stasis Leak, when Rimmer saw his older self telling him how to avoid his death and thought he was high. If Rimmer from Stasis Leak had remembered his conversation with his older self here, he'd be more likely to listen, and end up alive in the future. It's pretty neat.
I am alive!
Overall, this is better than Body Swap, but not quite as good as the first 3 episodes of the series, and definitely better than Stasis Leak, which is the main thing really. The series finale is the last day, when Crichton receives a message from his manufacturer, played by Robert Llewellyn, informing him that he's at the end of his shelf life, so he'll be shut down and his replacement is en route.
The only truly terrible thing is that, as my adopted owner, you have to die with me. Joke. Deadpan mode.
This is another character piece, but one that concentrates on Crichton as he prepares for the end, rather than the usual Lister and Rimmer stuff. This episode also introduces Silicon Heaven, the mechanoid religion. It's a belief programmed into artificial life forms so that they will serve humans and then not struggle when their time is up.
Just out of interest, is Silicon Heaven the same place as human heaven?
Humans don't go to heaven. No. Someone just made that up to prevent you from all going nuts.
Lister decides to throw a party for Crichton at the Officers' Club. Holly's invented some food and drink that he can take, and everyone gives presents. General Patton's sinus fluid, an earring, and best of all, Marilyn Monroe bot. As they get drunker, they get melancholic, and Lister reveals that he was found in a box under a pool table. Remember this, it'll come up later on. In the morning, there's hangovers all round, and Crichton's taking his impending death much less well. Last night, he really lived for the first time. To make things worse, his expiry date is self-inflicted, and if Crichton's still alive when his replacement arrives, he has orders to kill.
He's here! He's arrived!
Crichton's replacement is Hudson 10, state-of-the-art mechanoid, more human-looking, bigger, stronger, fabulous makeup, faster, more intelligent, and completely insane after thousands of years alone in deep space.
I'm just doing my job. It's not my fault if I love it.
The fight goes about as well as most things they do. I won't spoil the end, but it is pretty clever. Overall, this is another strong one, not quite as good as the first 3 of the series or Time Slides, but better than Body Swap. Again, Body Swap wasn't bad, the series is just really strong. Gordon Kennedy, who played Hudson, is great, though his main role is to do a Dr. Claw impersonation and be tall. But he does it beautifully. It's good to see Robert Llewellyn without the Crichton makeup too. Overall, this series is better than the last 2, it's more imaginative, more varied, and more technically impressive. Body Swap is the worst episode, but it's really hard to decide on the best. So I'll just say Polymorph, I'm a sucker for an alien parody. And I don't think you can see it in the finished show, but the TARDIS is on board when Starbug leaves Red Dwarf.
We have never watched Red Dwarf. We are not familiar with its content. All Earth television is human propaganda. The works of Shakespeare were written by a Dalek.